Somewhere on the northern plains, a family once woke up wrapped in the same blankets they fell asleep in, and it wasn't a lifestyle choice. It was 40 degrees below zero outside, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 10 minutes. There was no thermostat to nudge, no space heater to plug in, no weather app warning them a storm was coming 3 days early. Just poles, hide, fire, and a body of knowledge sharp enough to keep entire communities alive winter after winter. What's wild is that some of these people slept warmer in a tent made of animal skin than plenty of us do in houses with central heating and a Wi-Fi-enabled thermostat. Their survival came down to a handful of design choices most people today would never think to try, and once you hear how the whole system worked together, you'll understand why some of it still shows up in outdoor survival gear right now. It started before a single pole went into the ground. Choosing where to place a shelter was treated as seriously as building it. Groups like the Blackfoot and Lakota looked for natural windbreaks first, a stand of trees, a river bluff, a dip in the land, anything that could blunt the worst of the wind before it ever reached the camp. The opening of the shelter was always angled away from the prevailing wind direction, usually facing east, so the wind couldn't blow directly into the entrance, and so morning sunlight could warm the interior as early as possible. This wasn't guesswork. It was observation passed down over countless winters, a kind of accumulated data set with no spreadsheets involved. Wind chill can drop the effective temperature of a shelter dramatically even if the structure itself is solid, so cutting wind exposure before construction even began was already half the battle won. Modern architects call this passive design. Back then, it was just called knowing your land. We now spend thousands of dollars on smart home systems that adjust room temperature automatically, and somehow half of us still leave a window open in January. Get the site wrong, and no amount of clever engineering inside the shelter could save you, because sustained wind exposure alone can cause hypothermia even at temperatures well above freezing. But picking the right spot was only the beginning. The shape of the shelter itself did most of the heavy lifting. The classic tipi wasn't just a cone-shaped tent, it was a wind tunnel turned inside out. The steep angled walls meant that wind hitting the structure was deflected up and around rather than slamming directly into a flat surface. Think about the difference between wind hitting a wall versus wind sliding off the side of a mountain. That's essentially what the shape was doing, using its own geometry to survive forces that would flatten a boxier structure. At the very top, adjustable smoke flaps controlled airflow with almost switch-like precision. By repositioning two long poles attached to the flaps, the people inside could open or close the smoke hole depending on wind direction, letting smoke escape from a fire without letting cold air rush back in. This is basic fluid dynamics. Air moves from high pressure to low pressure, and the flap system exploited that constantly, funneling smoke out while sealing the shelter from gusts. It's honestly wild to think that they had a manually operated ventilation system centuries before we invented smart thermostats that still can't agree with each other on what temperature the living room should be. Get the flap positioning wrong during a storm, and smoke could fill the shelter fast enough to cause suffocation, or the wind could funnel straight down into the fire pit and undo hours of careful heat management. Understanding the shape solved the wind problem, but the real trick was what they built inside that shape. That's where the inner lining came in, sometimes called a dew cloth or liner, and this detail is one people almost always miss. Instead of relying on a single layer of hide for the outer wall, many teepees had a second layer of hide or fabric hung on the inside, creating a gap of a few inches between the inner liner and the outer cover. That gap wasn't wasted space. It was functioning almost exactly like the air pocket inside a modern double-paned window. Trapped air is a poor conductor of heat, meaning it slows down heat loss dramatically compared to a single solid barrier. The liner also directed cold drafts that snuck in from ground level upward and out through the smoke hole at the top, instead of letting them swirl around at head height where people were sitting or sleeping. So while the outer hide was fighting wind and precipitation, the inner liner was quietly running its own private insulation system, creating a buffer zone of warmer, still air that the household actually lived inside. It's almost funny that we now pay a premium for energy-efficient windows, when the concept of trapping a layer of dead air for insulation was already fully functional in a portable home held up by wooden poles. Without that liner, cold air would pool right at ground level exactly where people sat and slept, turning a survivable night into a dangerous one, through slow creeping heat loss nobody would notice until it was too late. With the shape and the lining working together, All that was left was managing the one thing capable of turning the whole shelter from cold to comfortable. Fire, but not fire the way most people picture it, a wild, roaring blaze in the middle of the floor. Inside a winter shelter, the fire was small, controlled and central, usually contained in a shallow pit lined with stones. Stones matter here because they don't just contain the flame, they absorb heat throughout the evening and radiate it back out slowly for hours after the fire dies down, acting almost like a battery for warmth. The fire was rarely allowed to blaze large, because a bigger fire actually pulls in more cold air from outside to feed the combustion, counterintuitively making the space draftier rather than warmer. Instead, coals were carefully banked and maintained at a slow burn overnight, sometimes tended by whoever woke first in the family rotation, refreshing the embers just enough to keep a baseline of heat going until morning. This is essentially the same principle behind a modern wood stove damper. Restrict the airflow, slow the burn, stretch the heat output over a longer period instead of blasting it all out at once. We built central heating systems with thermostats, Wi-Fi apps, and remote scheduling, and plenty of us still can't figure out how to keep a single space heater from tripping the breaker. If the fire went out completely on a sub-zero night and nobody caught it fast enough, the shelter's temperature could plummet within an hour, turning a survivable structure into a freezer with a door. Managing the fire kept the air warm, but the ground and the sleeping area needed their own separate defense system. That defense came from layers of bedding built specifically to fight heat loss from the one direction fire couldn't reach easily, straight down into the earth. The ground itself is a massive heat sink, meaning it will pull warmth directly out of a sleeping body through simple conduction, if there's nothing blocking that transfer. So thick buffalo robes, sometimes multiple hides deep, were laid down as flooring and sleeping surfaces, creating a barrier between warm bodies and frozen earth. Buffalo hide in particular was prized because the hair traps a huge volume of tiny air pockets, and once again, trapped air is the real insulating hero here, not the hide itself. This is the exact same reasoning behind modern sleeping bags rated for extreme cold, thick loft, lots of trapped air, minimal direct contact with the cold surface beneath you. Families would also sleep close together under shared robes using body heat collectively rather than each person fighting the cold alone, essentially forming a low-tech, self-warming unit through shared thermal mass. It's a little humbling that we spend hundreds of dollars on gear specifically engineered to replicate what a stack of buffalo hides was already doing for free, just with better marketing and a returns policy. Skip this step, sleep directly on frozen ground with insufficient padding, and the body can lose heat fast enough overnight to trigger dangerous hypothermia even inside an otherwise well-built shelter. The bedding solved the ground-level heat loss, but there was still the exterior itself to reinforce once the deep cold and snow really set in. That's where snow, ironically, became an ally instead of an enemy. Once heavy snowfall arrived, it was often banked deliberately around the base of the shelter, piled up against the lower few feet of the outer hide walls. This might sound backwards, packing frozen material against your home to keep it warm, but snow is actually an excellent insulator because it's mostly trapped air held in place by ice crystals, similar in principle to the way igloos work far up in the Arctic. By banking snow around the base, drafts sneaking in at ground level were sealed off almost completely, and the packed snow layer buffered the base of the shelter from direct wind contact. It's the same logic behind why some modern homes in extremely cold regions are partially built into hillsides or banked with earth, using a natural material's insulating properties instead of fighting against them. We treat snow as an inconvenience that shuts down entire cities and cancels flights, while here it was functioning as a literal building material, improving thermal performance. Without that snowbank sealing the base, cold air could keep funneling in exactly where people's feet and lower bodies were positioned during the night, undermining every other insulation effort happening above it. With walls sealed at the bottom and warm air managed above, the final piece of the puzzle wasn't the shelter at all, it was what people wore inside it. Clothing worked as a secondary, wearable shelter, layered specifically to trap warmth the same way the teepee itself did. Garments made from buffalo hide, rabbit fur, and other animal skins were worn with the fur turned inward against the body during the coldest stretches, maximizing that same trapped air insulation principle at a much smaller, personal scale. Multiple thinner layers were often preferred over one thick layer, because several layers with small air gaps between them insulate better than a single heavy piece, since each gap becomes its own pocket of trapped warm air. Footwear followed the same logic, insulated with dried grass or fur linings inside hide moccasins, protecting feet from frostbite in a way that's remarkably similar to how modern winter boots are engineered with multiple insulating layers today. It's almost funny that we now buy jackets boasting about thermal layering technology as some kind of innovation, when it was standard practice for people living through winters that would make most modern jackets look like a light windbreaker. Improper layering, wet clothing left against the skin, or exposed extremities during extended time outside the shelter could lead to frostbite within minutes in extreme wind chill, a risk taken seriously because there was no emergency room to visit afterward. Every piece of clothing, every layer of hide, every choice made outside the shelter mattered just as much as the structure itself. None of these methods worked in isolation. The site selection reduced wind exposure before construction even started. The conical shape redirected that wind instead of resisting it head-on. The inner liner trapped a layer of warm air between two walls. The fire, carefully banked rather than left to blaze, radiated slow, steady heat through stone rather than wasting it. The bedding blocked the relentless pull of the frozen ground. The snow, instead of being the enemy, became a sealing agent at the base, and the clothing extended that same insulating logic onto the human body itself. Each piece solved a different physical problem: wind, conduction, ventilation, radiant heat, and together they created a complete survival system out of materials found entirely in the surrounding land. What's remarkable isn't just that this worked, it's that it worked well enough to sustain entire communities across generations of brutal winters without a single power grid, without a single insulated wall panel, without anything we would now call modern technology. It's easy to assume that comfort and survival require constant innovation and new products, but sometimes the most advanced solution is simply understanding your environment well enough to work with it instead of against it. The people who built and lived in these shelters weren't primitive, they were engineers working in a different material language, one built from hide, wood, fire, and an intimate knowledge of the land that most of us have completely lost touch with today.